Hello, my name is Salik Sally. This is a comprehensive tutorial on using Microsoft Excel 2016. I have designed this tutorial to serve as a learning tool for anyone who wishes to learn Excel, even those who have dreaded it for years. We will start with the absolute basics and then proceed with the most commonly used features in today's business environment. The goal is to empower you with the familiarity and knowledge so that you can add Excel as a technology tool to your technology toolkit to advance your studies, careers, and resume. So please stick with me while we take this journey together. The concepts that you learned here apply also to the previous versions of Excel, such as Excel 2013, 2010, and 2007. So spend a few minutes here and there in this tutorial, and you will end up saving hours in the future. Let's get started. First, the very basic concepts. And before we move any further here in our study of Microsoft Excel, one of the new features in Excel 2016 is the Tell Me feature, and this is available in Word and other applications of Microsoft Office as well. So if you don't know how to do something, you could click here on this little bar here and click on Search for something. So let's say I want to adjust the margins, or I want to add a footer. So you just search for it. You don't have to know where it is located within Excel, and then you click on header and footer and it will change it for you. Or charts, and so on. So basically this is a Tell Me feature. Tell me what you want to do and I'll just get you there in doing it, and it will take you to what you want it to search for. So it's a good feature to get to know in Excel 2016. It is not available in previous versions of Excel. So as I mentioned, first things first. The first time you open Excel, this is what you'll be presented. Here on the left-hand side, you'll have a listing of recent documents that you might have opened. And then also here in the bottom left, you can open other files, Excel files or workbooks that you might have worked in the past. On the right-hand side is a listing of various templates that you could utilize for using Excel. So in this case, instead of you having to, let's say, do an inventory list, or let's say that you wanted to do a family budget, instead of you starting from scratch, you could pick one of those templates and double-click on it, and it will be downloaded, and then all you have to do is plug in the numbers here. So let's go back here. Additionally, you can search by various categories and also search for online templates and download and utilize them the same way. Now, as we are starting here, I wanted to also explain how do you get started with the first workbook and what are the different components in the application so that you can easily and effectively navigate in the application as you start using it. So, once you open Excel for the first time, if you're starting from scratch, you simply click here on a blank workbook. At this point, let's navigate a little bit and understand how the application works before we move to anything else. So on the very top here, you have the File menu and the various different tabs: Home, Insert, Page Layout, Formulas, and so on. Those are very similar to other Microsoft applications such as Word and PowerPoint and so on. The idea is the same. So you have here the Home tab, which has all of these different sets of icons and functions as to what they do. Those are also arranged together in various groups. So for example, anything related to the fonts, it's under the Fonts section or grouping. Anything under the alignment that you need to align the text and so on for the different cells, it's under the Alignment group. And then for anything related to numbers, it's under the Numbering group. And then anything related to the styles is under the Styles group, and so on. And that continues from tab to tab, the same idea. It is also important to understand here that those tabs are organized, just like in Word, in a very particular order, mostly depending on what you're doing and how you're working in an Excel spreadsheet. So for example, you might be tinkering with initial design and calculations. Those calculations and designs and stuff are in the Home tab, starting with the font, alignment, number, styles, and then some basic calculations here. You can insert other stuff such as formulas and other components. You can change here on the next tab the layout of your spreadsheet, and we'll go through some of this stuff together. Then you can work with various formulas and manipulate data and review the document here, and then view it and change the viewing in your worksheet. Now here in the bottom you have this scrolling bar here. Typically you might have one or more worksheets here in the bottom. Now let me explain this to a couple terms in Excel. First, Excel is designed for you to do calculations just like budgets or projections and anything that you want the computer to calculate cells or values via a formula. You probably have heard the term spreadsheet. Spreadsheet is just a file that contains those calculations, and it's typically utilizing Excel or some kind of spreadsheet software. In Excel, those files could be referred as workbooks. So sometimes you might hear the term workbook. So the workbook and worksheet are used interchangeably. Now, the other thing to remember here is that particularly in a workbook, you have what's called the worksheets. The worksheets are those, think of it just like the pages on a book. So you have, for example, sheet 1 here. You could add another worksheet here. Now you have sheet 2, sheet 3, and so on. So now as you enter calculations, and we'll get to those in a moment, in your specific worksheet, you can link those calculations with other values in other worksheets as well. So now those worksheets, they make up the workbook. Now in each worksheet you also have, and again please stick with me at this point, these are very basic, but you have to understand the basics in order to do the next steps in this tutorial here. So in a particular workbook or even a worksheet here, you have these columns A, B, and so on. Then you also have the rows. So you have the columns by the letters here, and the rows are represented by a number. Then you also have those cells. For example, this is referred to as B3. That would be the reference for this cell, and so on. So that the cell that we also have clicked on at this point, it's referred to as the active cell. Now in each one of those cells you can insert text like we inserted up here. You can insert numbers and format those numbers either as general numbers or as currency or percentage. You can format that cell to be a percentage, or you can format it to be plain text, as I mentioned earlier. The other thing that is important to understand in Excel is that you also have formulas, and that's what performs those calculations. So for example, the formulas in Excel, this is very important to remember, that all the formulas start with the equal sign. Let's do a very basic calculation at this point. So let's say on B2 we have 35, and then on B3 we have 56. And now on B4 we want to get the total of these two values. So one of the easiest way would be to do here, and I'm just jumping ahead a little bit here, we want to put in there a formula. So now that formula, it starts, again, remember it starts with the equal sign. And then in this case, I'm going to put the function here, sum, and we'll get to explain that further. And then we are going to add here B2 all the way through B3. In this case, all the way through, it's represented by the colon. And then we hit enter. So I simply selected that range, B2 through B3, and then we hit enter, and now notice it's 91. If any of these numbers change, then that total will be updated automatically. So that's the basic idea of spreadsheets. So we have the workbooks and then the worksheets. Now those worksheets here in the bottom, you'll be able to navigate from left to right. Once you have more that once they don't fit in here, you'll navigate to the right, and you also have this scrolling bar here to navigate within the same worksheet. If you wanted to rename those worksheets, you can simply right-click on them and then choose to rename it, give it a different name. For example, this would be January, and so on. One other tip before we proceed any further here, it's also important to remember that the best way to learn the application in Excel, besides going through this tutorial, is to basically click on the different functions and see what's available and what each one of those icons does, and then try it. Select stuff in here and tinker with it, because it's not going to break. You're just going to know then as to where things are located. So stick with me at this point, and now we'll continue into more of the detailed application features and learn how to do some of the calculations. So we'll start with some of the additional basic concepts in doing some of the calculations in here. I'm going to utilize here a worksheet that I'll also post for you online to access and follow the videos. So keep in mind that you can control those worksheets by these buttons here, from one to the other, to move from one page to the other. You can also click here in the bottom of the worksheets to move from one to the other, or by clicking on the next page button on the orange area here. In this session, I'm going to go over some of the basic features of Microsoft Excel, such as adding formulas in a cell to calculate values, formatting part of the worksheet, and using various formulas such as sum, maximum, minimum, average, and count. So let's assume we have this data here in Excel. I simply type this. There's nothing magical about it. You just type those values, and then those values, the first thing that we are going to learn here is how to format these values here, these numbers, into currency. So all that you have to do is you select the cells that you want to format a certain way with a certain type of formatting, and then we can either click here under dollars or on the drop down a different currency, or we can click on the drop down here and choose currency. And notice the dollar amounts have been entered. Now, at this point, we are going to learn how to add a formula in this cell to get the totals for training for all the months. So one of the concepts that is important to understand is that all formulas in Excel start with an equal sign. So you have the equal sign, and then you have the function. The function could be sum, or it could be something else. And there are hundreds of functions in Excel. We'll get to those later. Then the third part of it is the range that you want to calculate, or what you want to calculate. Now the range, it's typically expressed by the cell address for it, or the reference to it, the cell reference to it. So for example, if I wanted to calculate these numbers from here to here, that would be E6 through E14. So if I could put in here E6 colon E14. And notice it's highlighted in blue, and also it's displayed here in the formula bar. And then we hit enter here in a moment. So again, you have the equal sign, the function, whatever the function is, and then the range. And the area within the range is represented by a colon. And then you hit enter, and that is going to be calculated. So you can have those calculations anywhere in any cell as long as it contains a specific formula. So in this case here, the easiest would be for us to insert this formula, and I'll show you the first one by doing this manually. We do the equal sign, then this would be C6. So we need the function first, then C6 colon, that represents anything from here to here through E6, and then hit enter. So that's one way to do the calculation here. The other way to do the calculation is by using this under editing here. You have this drop down here for sum, average, count, numbers, max, minimum, and more functions as well. So let's say we want the sum here. So the sum, we clicked on sum here, and notice it selected this section automatically. If you're going to use this feature, however, make sure that it's calculating the right range of cells. If that is correct, you just hit enter, and now it did it for you automatically. Another method to enter the formula here is by hitting the equal sign, then the function, and then you can simply select the range that you want to calculate, or you could click on the actual cell references. In that way, you then have to line them up manually. Then you hit enter, and there it is, the calculation. We could do the same thing down here as well. And by the way, I have these comments here as to how to calculate it. So if you're following this tutorial, you can also download the worksheet and follow it on your own. Now down here, we want to calculate all the expenses for January. So we click here on the equal sign, sum, like we learned earlier, open parentheses, select the whole range, hit enter, and it's done. Now, we need to calculate it for the other months as well. So is there a shorter way of doing it? And the answer to that is yes. You can use what's called the autofill feature. The autofill feature, instead of you having to go through each one of those cells, what you can do is you can copy and replicate that same formula. So this is our formula. We can replicate it to all the cells following downward, or all the cells going from left to right. So how do you do that? All you have to do is you just click on the cell reference here, and then hold the mouse on the bottom right here when it changes to a little plus sign, and then just drag it down. And notice it has performed the calculation. One thing to keep in mind here is that double check whether those references are correct. For example, here for 88, is it calculating the right stuff here? This also works from left to right. And notice this is our formula, and we can drag it to the right by, when it changes on the bottom right to a little plus sign, drag it to the right, and it's going to give us the totals. Notice what it's doing. It's taking it from C6 through C14. Then you go to the next one, D6 through D14, E6 through E14, and so on. So it's seeing incrementally from one point to the other to the other. And this works the same way for anything in sequence. So for example, you have Monday. You drag this down, it fills the days of the week. Anything like January. And it proceeds the same way. The other thing that you could use this for is for numbers. For example, now for numbers, you either have to hold down the control key to do it automatically, or you can click right here in the bottom and choose to fill the series. It's going to just keep on moving them. And there it is. So control button or fill a series for numbers. You can also do things that are in a certain sequence of other sorts. For example, let's say you want to have anything in a certain sequence, for example, 5, 0, 5, 10, 15, and so on. So you select your pattern that you have, and then you drag it down. And notice it's building this automatically for you. So that's how you use the autofill feature. Now the next thing, another function here, is the maximum. The maximum is determining, based on these values, we want to determine which one was the highest number in this column. So you can do this with a formula. In Excel, you can click on formulas here, and you can see all these different groups of formulas or functions, actually the functions. And then you can see here under all, these are all the different functions. Now what we could do here is we could just choose, we want to find the maximum. So if we start typing max here, or you could have typed maximum, notice it comes up with a bunch of suggestions. So notice here, max, it returns the largest value in a series or in a set of values. So you have a set of them here, and it's going to give you the highest one. Now to learn how to do it, you can also click on help on this function, and it will go on the web, and it will give you examples, descriptions, examples, and all kinds of other information about any of those, how to do it and so on. So keep that in mind, that that's how you learn about other formulas. We'll not be able to go through every single one of them. Now here we want to insert to find the highest number. So we do the equal sign, max, you can double click on it, and then you select the range that you want to find the highest number. So you select the range here. We don't want the total, of course. Hit enter, and the highest number is 500. If I change this to that, notice all these calculations will be updated automatically. Now, if I wanted to get the highest number for the other columns as well, I could use the autofill feature that we covered earlier. Just simply drag this to the right, and then we are all set. The next one is we want to find the lowest number. So we are finding the minimum. We do the equal sign, min, open parentheses, and then select the range for your calculation. Hit enter, and now there's the minimum. Use the autofill feature, and we are set. Then we want to find the average. The average, you could either do equal sign average, or don't forget as well, we have this stuff up here under the Home tab. Notice there is also this drop down here under to find the average. Now notice it's trying to pick the wrong sequence of numbers here, so we want to select here the right range and then hit enter, and that's why I like it to do this manually. Use the autofill, and there it is. Now you can also count how many values are in here in this range. So we can do equal sign, count, and then open parentheses, and then hit enter. So there are 9 rows in here. And then in this one, there are only 8. Notice one of them is blank. Okay, so far we learned how to add some of those totals, how to format these numbers into currency, and also we learned how to find the total, the sum for a bunch of numbers. We learned maximum, minimum, average, and count. Here is another example that you could explore for yourself. Tinker with those on your own as well. In this session, we are going to learn how to use some of the basic formatting features here in Excel. Typically, even if you did the best calculations and so in your spreadsheets, it's necessary also to utilize some of the functions and features to save you time and also to make it more presentable for. So let's assume we have this worksheet here and we want to make it more presentable, to merge a bunch of cells together. So you select a whole bunch of cells here that we may have in this section, and what you do is you go here under merge and center. Now in your computer it might be, the icon might be larger because of the sake of recording. I have this smaller. So I click here on merge and center, and it's taking whatever was in those cells, merging all those cells together and centering the content of that text. Now at this point I could make this font larger and smaller, different colors and all that type of stuff. However, I could format this cell by using one of the cell styles. So this saves you time, of course. You can pick one of those styles from here and notice the live preview that takes place as well. So I'm going to choose heading 1. Now the next thing that you could do is you could select this data and format it by using one of the styles. So pick one of those styles from here and then click OK. And notice it has been formatted with some other lines and such in there. If you don't like that one, you can simply go to the styles and pick something else. So for example, this is slightly better here, of course. The other thing that you can do is, and let's learn at this point about another concept, that you can pick the data within a range here, and you can format this data under the Home tab here. You can utilize conditional formatting. So conditional formatting, it easily spots trends and patterns in your data using bars, colors, and icons for visual importance, or to highlight the important connections or values. So there are various things here. You can highlight anything greater than a certain range. You could anything less than, equal to, and so on. You could do the top 10 rules, top 10%, bottom 10%, and all that type of thing. You could also use data bars. Data bars, notice here's a live preview. Based on the values within each cell, it will highlight it with a specific color, so it stands out. And also you could use different scales here. So for example, you want to see the different yellow, red, blue, and so on. And also make it even fancier with different icon sets. One other thing I wanted to mention here is that you can create your own rules. Just click on create new rule here and then choose your criteria that you want to apply. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to invest into that at this point. That was some of the stuff regarding the formatting, so stay tuned here. We are going to move to some additional basic calculations in our worksheet. In this next session, I'm going to go over some of the other basic calculations, and these would be the arithmetic calculations such as adding and subtracting and so on, because these are the key components in any office duties that you'll particularly be doing with Excel. And these are fundamental concepts. So if you're following the tutorial here from the previous sections as well, at this point you could click here under Basic Calculations in the bottom, or you can click on Next Page here on the right-hand side. So now at this point we are in understanding some of the arithmetic basic calculations. So we're going to learn about getting a bunch of the deductions. So let's assume that we have a bunch of employees here, and this is their monthly pay, and then we are getting some deductions that they have to give up here, deduction 1 and deduction 2. Then we are going to calculate how much they are giving up. Then we're going to calculate their net pay, then the annual pay, and then also the weekly pay that they are supposed to take. So the purpose here is to actually, for us to understand how subtraction works, how multiplication works, and division, and so on. Again, like I mentioned earlier, these are fundamental concepts you will be utilizing no matter what work environment you are going to be. In this case, we want to first probably calculate the deductions, the total for the deductions. As we learned earlier, equal sign, sum, and then the range here. Hit enter, and that is calculate. Now notice here in this is Office 2016, and it filled out the other values automatically. Now in this case, that's a new feature of Excel 2016. If I didn't want that feature, and for now I'm going to undo it, this is where you control that option. So you'd also, if that is not going to be taking place automatically, you can drag this down like in the previous versions of Excel, and now we have the calculations here for those deductions. The next concept that we want to learn here is we want to get the net pay. So the gross pay minus the deductions would give us the net pay here for these employees. So in this case, what we need to do, and what you could do as well, is by doing this manually. So remember that function here. So we do B6 minus deductions, which is E6. Notice in this case, we do not need to utilize the function because this is a very basic arithmetic calculation that we are performing. Then we hit enter, and it gives us the total here for the total net pay for Hubert. Now notice this is a new feature in Excel 2016. It tries to figure out as to what you are about to do, and it does it for you. This is the autocorrect options, but we can choose to undo the calculated column, and it'll go back to like the older previous versions of Excel. Now in this case, if you chose to use it this way, you can use the autofill feature, which it did for us, and then go and get the totals for the other employees as well, the net pay for the other employees. So that is using the subtraction function in formula in Excel. Let's calculate here the net income annually. So annually here, we're talking for the 12 months for this employee. Now, in this case, of course, we can take the monthly pay times 12. So we're using the multiplication function or concept here. So to represent that in Excel, what we do is we put the equal sign, then we take this value here, the net pay, we can again either click on it or type the reference, times 12. Now, by the way, for those of you that are wondering why is it putting these net pay and all this other stuff in here, it's because our table here has been formatted with this special formatting, and it's using the label from here. However, we could use in there the F6, I guess that's the reference for it, F6 times 12 as well. So either one will work. So F6 times 12. Now, One thing to keep in mind here is that I usually don't recommend that you use static values in here within part of a formula. We are using them at this point because for simplicity you might want to put, for example, another reference here to say months, and then have 12 or 6 or whatever, and you change this by referencing this value. So by basically, instead of saying times 12, I could use I13 and then hit enter. And that will give you the flexibility then to say, okay, what about for 6 months? Now it's 20,000. Well, for 12 months, that is 41,000, and so on. Now, if I drag this down, you'll notice that there is a problem here. It's not giving us the calculation, the proper calculation. And the reason for that is because it's shifting here. So notice it's saying I14, I15, I16, and so on, and it's giving us a blank value. The reason for that is because this is shifting down on this side, and we'll cover that in the next session here as to the types of references. To correct that feature, you would use here what's called an absolute reference by putting the $sign in front of the column and the row, and then hit enter. And then once we apply that, that calculation will be correct. But we'll get to that. Stay tuned for the types of references tutorial to understand why we did that and how we did that. So that's multiplication. Again, the equal sign, the reference, times the value or another reference. Now here we want to learn about the weekly pay. We know that there are 52 weeks typically in a year. Now what's the weekly pay for Hubert here? So to calculate that, we could do equal sign and then take G6 divided by, and division is represented by a slash, 52. Or you could have a reference here like we did earlier. And then this is the weekly pay, 805. And this is the feature, like I mentioned earlier, of Office 2016 in auto-filling that automatically for you. So that's it as far as understanding the basic functions in Excel, arithmetic functions, adding, subtracting, dividing, and multiplying. Again, it's a very powerful feature and one of the fundamental concepts that you'll need in order to successfully use Excel in business or career or whatever you're doing. In this next session, I'm going to go over a new feature in Excel 2016 referred to as the quick analysis. And we'll go here under quick analysis. And at this point here under quick analysis, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit, you have a bunch of numbers. There are the directions here on the right hand side as well. So what you can do is you look at the bottom right of the selection, and that's where you'll see the quick analysis button. And from there, you can explore the various different options. For example, you can get charts, you can get totals and tables with just one single click. So the way you'll do that is by simply selecting this range of data. And now notice you have this quick analysis area here. So you click on it, and then you can see here the data bars, very similar to what we saw earlier, that you can apply to this. A color scale that you could apply based on the values in there. Additionally, you could use icon sets, greater values, or the other thing that you can do here is you can go under charts and you can see a preview of various possible charts that you could utilize from that data. Or you can access the totals. For example, getting the totals here, notice in the very bottom now it added a new average column, or counting, or percentages, or a running total. So it's another way of you utilizing some of the functions that we learned manually, but utilizing them with a single click from here. The other thing that you can do here under tables, you could create here a fancier looking table if you needed to, a pivot table. that you can massage the data in various ways, and we'll cover the pivot tables toward the end of this tutorial as it gets more complex here, but this is where you kind of get the idea. And then, for example, notice it's doing pivot table calculations here, financial, miscellaneous, and all that type of stuff by various categories, and then additional functions as well. Then you have also these various types of lines and columns, or win versus loss, that it's going to apply within a specific cell. So this is within the actual cell, or demonstrate the trends for the data. So you can check them out for yourself as well. And then you can format these by using various styles here in Excel. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a new feature, particularly in Excel 2016. In this next session, we're going to learn how to sort and filter data in Excel. Well, suppose that we have this data in this worksheet here. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to sort this data by date ascending. So to sort the data, all you have to do is you click on that field anywhere within that column or where the data field is, and then go under Sort and Filter here, and then choose to sort them from oldest to newest or newest to oldest. So we want to order them in ascending order. So this is ascending right here. And you could do that for any of those other cells here as well. Now, the next thing that we want to learn here is how to enable filtering for this data. How do we filter? So for example, we want to see only the sales by quad or by sunset or whatever it is, that the product that we are selling here. So the way to do that is very simple. Again, you go anywhere in your data and then click on Sort and Filter. Then we click here on Filter, and that enables the filtering for this worksheet. Let's say we want to filter here by a sales rep. So all we have to do is click on this drop down, that we got these new drop downs now that we enabled filtering, and then pick the salesperson. So let's say we want only Smith here, and then click OK. And now notice that only the sales from Smith will show up. And here at this point, we could sort it by other options as well. For example, we could use what we learned earlier as well, so under largest from smallest and so on. Now, if you wanted to remove the specific filter, you'd click on the filtering icon here, and then uncheck that specific filter. And then click to select them all, and it's going to display all of them again. The data is not going to disappear, it's still there, but it's just filtering it a different way. The other thing that you can do is you can filter by multiple items or multiple options by simply clicking here on, let's say we select the Eastern section. So that's one filter that we applied, and then we are going to also filter by a specific rep here on, let's say we want to see Smith again, and then that's a case of filtering by more than one criteria. The other thing that you can do as well is that you can filter by a specific value. So if you go here under Filter Numbers, you can choose to show the top 10, above average, or a specific, like if the value equals or is greater than, let's say, 400. Notice it will take out this value, at least here 357. It will not show up. And now we have multiple filtering options within the same data file. So it's pretty cool. Play with it and apply all kinds of other filters and options in there, but it's one of the key features of Excel beyond the very basics. In this session, I'm going to cover the different types of references in Excel. They serve as a foundation for learning Excel and utilizing data in Excel spreadsheets. So if you're following the tutorial, let's go to the types of references here. And then here under the types of references, we are going to tinker with this type of data here. Let me make this slightly bigger for ourselves. So we talked earlier about the various types of references here. So for example, you put a formula here. It says sum C6 through E6, and then the next one is C7 through E7, C8 through E8, and so on. So that everything here is in a sequence. We were able to drag this downward, and the calculations were performed correctly because the cells shifted one at a time in sequence. So here under data references, though, let's suppose that we have a budget of $20,000, and then also we have a decrease in the budget by 5%. So then we want to calculate here the difference. Well, the way to calculate the difference in this case would be by using one of the knowledge that we learned from the previous tutorials, is by using the equal sign. We're using a formula here, the training B8 times the 5%, which is B6, and then we hit enter, and notice it's $200, which is correct. If we wanted to use the autofill feature to drag this down, notice what will happen. First, on the next cell, you get a blank value. The next one, you get these number signs. The number signs, by the way, what they mean is that the content of that cell does not fit. So what you need to do is basically adjust the width of the cell by simply dragging it to the right-hand side. And now, notice it fits. The other trick here is that you can double-click, and it will make the width of that cell exactly properly to the proper width needed. So double-clicking between the columns there, it'll do that. Now notice that we are giving up from travel here, that was $2,000, and we have to give up 5%. Notice it ended up being 10 million. What's happening is that as we are using the autofill feature here to populate the formulas, what's happening is that it's, instead of B6, which was correct in the first one, now it's moving to B7. B7, it's multiplying this blank one right here, the red cell. The next one is, it's multiplying 8,000 here by 4,000, and then the 10 million comes by multiplying 2,000 times 5,000. And that's where we came with that. So now, to correct this, what we could do is we could utilize what's called an absolute reference. So you have three types of references typically. You have the relative references, and relative, it means it's going to move. As you use the autofill feature from one cell to the other, it's going to automatically change, and that's what happened here. The absolute references are those that you can go and tell the computer right here that this B6, it's an absolute reference. I don't want it to shift whether left to right or top down. And in this case, to convert it into an absolute reference, and that probably will be your question, is by putting dollar signs in front of it. You could put the dollar signs manually, like that, and it takes quite a bit of time. Or you can do it by pressing the F4 key on your keyboard. So if I tap the F4 key here on the reference that I want to lock, that will put the dollar signs automatically. And then I tap F4 again. That changes to what's called a mixed reference. Mixed because this B6 is saying that the column here, column B, is not locked, but the row 6, it's going to be locked in this case. If I press the F4 key again, notice it switched to a different type of mixed reference where now the column is going to be locked and so on. So all in all, what we need to do here is this 5%, we don't want that to be changing. We lock it with the dollar signs and make it an absolute reference. And then you drag this down, and now you have the proper calculations here. So out of 2,000, 5%, that's you have to give up $100. So that's the idea here. And we utilized this in the previous section as well when we did the basic concepts earlier, or the basic calculations earlier. This gives you the flexibility to change this. Okay, what would happen if I chose 7%? What would I have to give up? And now notice right here. Now the difference you could also calculate here, total. And for 7%, they'd have to give up 1,400. If I made it 8%, then they'd have to give up 1,800 and all that type of thing. So that's the beauty of using Excel and using references here. Now you'd say, well, what about if I wanted to enter those references manually? Would that work? Yes, that would have worked, but you'd have to do it for every single one of them. And if you have a lot of data, which particularly in business you do, then that becomes a waste of time. So how can you use the mixed references? So here's an example of using the mixed references in Excel here. In this case, we'll create here a multiplication table. We want to multiply the row starting at B21, and we want to let the left column change, but not the row number. We want to multiply this times that, and then continue it, this times that, and then that times that, and give us all the possible calculations here. But we want to do that by using a single formula to design this. So basically, in the first one is we want to lock the row here so that B21 does not change. So we do the equal sign, and it is B. We could click on it, B21. And we want to lock the row, so we want the $sign right in front of 21. And then we want to multiply it by A22. Now in this case, we want to lock it, the column, because we want the column to move from one to the other, and let the rows shift. So we want to make the $sign right in front of A, like that. And then hit enter. Now notice the first one is right. So it's going to do B21 times A22. And that is 1 times 1 is 1. Now if we go to the right here and use the autofill feature to the right, notice what it did. It did C21 times A22. So that is correct as well. So again, the point here was that it went from B to C, and then it's going to move to D, E, and all that type of stuff. It's going to keep things in sequence. So I could replicate this all the way to 10. And notice it's correct. Now, I could also go down here, because our formula is correct on this first cell, and I could replicate it also downwards. So now what it's doing here, notice, it's saying it went from B21, which is static, it's going to A22, A24, and on and on and on. And we have not moved from a B column, that's why it has B. Now if we go here to the next one, and we drag this down, the formula is still going to be consistent, and it's saying C21. So notice C21, which is up here, 2 times A23, which is this one over here, and so on. So basically, we were able to create here a multiplication table with simply by setting one calculation or one formula using mixed references, and we were able to replicate that. So there are other uses on how to use the mixed references and the absolute references. The most common one would be the absolute references that we adjusted earlier, that we utilized earlier. But the mixed references, as you can see, they are quite powerful here as well in knowing how to design them. So again, this was locking the row on the top, on the first one, and then on this side we're locking the column. So hopefully that makes sense, and you'll find that this comes in handy in the next sections here. In this next session, we're going to learn how to create charts in Excel. We have here a variety of data options in our worksheet, and we want to create charts for them. So the concept of creating charts is pretty simple. Basically, the way it works is that you select the data, and then you click on charts. Now, the option to create the chart, you can either use this option right here in the bottom under charts, the quick analysis tool that we saw from earlier, or the other option that serves as a better concept is by going here under the Insert tab and then choosing Recommended Charts. Notice there are all kinds of other charts here as well, such as column charts, hierarchy, pie charts, and so on. The idea is to use the right chart for the right type of data representation. Sometimes it's very easy to skew the data by representing it the wrong type of chart. So typically, if you're dealing with percentages, you want to use a pie chart. If you're dealing with a long date range, which includes a lot of values and such, then you probably would use a line chart and so on. In Microsoft Excel here, there is also this option of recommended charts. So based on the data that you have selected, it's going to give you what Excel recommends in this case. So notice here I selected part of the column here in the first row as well, and I click OK, and that's the chart for just this set of data, just toys, boomerangs, and this in-store sales. If I want to tweak that chart even further, all I have to do is go and pick some other different designs from here on the top. I could also go and pick and change the colors to use a different color scheme. And you can also change the layout if you prefer a different layout. Notice how it's putting the numbers in various areas here through the live preview. And you could add different elements as well. Notice the contextual tools here on the top as well. Under the format, you could tweak the formatting, change additional properties for this chart, and also additional options to the right of this chart. Those are some of just the basic concepts on how you create the chart, how you kind of tinker with it. Now, the next thing that I'll try to show you here is that in some cases, you might have in-store sales, website sales, and you have 3 sets of data. So how do you apply that in a chart? Well, it's the same concept. You select the range of data here, and you go under Insert, and then Recommended Charts as well. And then pick the recommended type of chart that might come in handy for you. You click OK, and here's the grouped chart for this set of data. Now, of course, you can drag this and move it elsewhere in your worksheet where you're working with and customize it even further. The other type of chart that you could create here's another example of sales, for example, across multiple years. So in this case, you want to select the data, and then you go under Insert, and then Recommended Charts again. And notice the first recommended chart that Microsoft recommends here is a line chart, because you're dealing with multiple years. You want to see the pattern within those years. So pick the one that you prefer, and notice you have the chart right there. Now at this point, as we mentioned earlier as well, you can customize this with various other designs to make it more visually appealing for your audience. Notice you can also switch the rows of the columns, and you can change the data selection as well, including the changing the type of chart. Notice under the quick layout, as we discussed earlier, you can include additional values and options within your chart. The next example here, it goes against a year or a complete item. So now we can select this set of data and then go under Insert, choose Recommended Charts, and then at this point, the first option that Microsoft is giving us is the column chart. Because notice if you chose the pie chart here, it will probably not work quite as well because everything gets pretty much very closely together. So click on it, and there is the column chart for this specific year. The next option is multiple tests. This is very similar to what we used earlier in this one. And this type of chart, you can simply select it, the data, and then again insert the type of chart. Notice it's a column chart. In some cases you might want a line chart so that you can see the interactions or interfacing of them accordingly. Now, in the cases where you want to skip a specific area of data in your chart, what you can do, and this is kind of a neat little trick here, is basically, let's say I want to create a chart only for test 1 and test 3, and notice you have test 2 in the middle. What you can do is you hold down the control key while selecting the data range, and then at this point you go in under insert and then insert some kind of chart that you may prefer here. So let's say it's a line chart and I want to compare how 1 and 3 is doing, and that generates only the tests 1 and 3, in this case skipping test number 2. So again, the key there was to hold down the control key while selecting the data range. So that's charts in a nutshell. Feel free to tinker with them. Of course, they can customize them even further and utilize them even more effectively. In this session, I'm going to demonstrate how to use the Flash Fill feature in Excel 2016. This is a new feature that performs certain functions or certain tasks automatically. We learned about one of those earlier here, for example, as we were tinkering earlier with data. Here, we noticed that, for example, to calculate the annual income, it would be the net pay times 12. For example, so it would be F6 times 12. That was our example from earlier. We hit enter and notice this whole area got automatically filled. So the calculation that we're going to perform later, it got done automatically by the autofill feature or the Flash Fill feature in Excel 2016. So that was one of the functions of it in flash filling some kind of range of cells that we're going to autofill manually later. Now in this case here we have the email address of a bunch of individuals and we don't have their first and last name. Let's say we need that for building spreadsheet of sorts, so we want to separate those. So in this case what you can do is you can start typing here, for example, the first name. So we want to do Nancy, and then the next one we type Andrew. Now notice as we are typing Andrew here, it's flash filling. Notice it's matching the rest of the rows, so it's determining what we are doing here in this cell and looking at other subsequent cells and whether it could save us time. And now if we are happy with it, we simply hit enter and notice it's all complete. Now the next one here we put, we say last name, and then we want to do as well the same thing. So we put free, and notice I just started typing the next last name here from this area, and I hit enter and notice it filled it out automatically. So it's pretty cool, pretty powerful. Now we have two separate columns here that we could use for a mail merge or for other functionality, and that's the Flash Fill feature.